And Bobbie, kind of, again, thinking about how I set the scene for this conversation, we want things that work. How do we bring all these things together to work in unison?
Yeah, I mean, when we think about speed and accuracy and efficiency, what's the right thing to do for your customer? I think it's when we think about how do you bring things together, I think it's also we have to look at the angle of what are the choices that your claimant really wants. So, when we talk about the human element, do I want the human element or do I not want the human element? And I think that's where we will find that instead of having our own assumptions from an operations lens, building that process, when you talk to the customer will tell you what they want, how they want to engage with you, whether they want to engage with you, because everybody's different. And I think when you think about that premise, you have to start to connect those pieces and allow this approach of meeting the claimant where they're at, whether I want to do everything through my device or whether I want paper because I really want to touch and feel. Where technology really helps is where it takes out there's so much insurance jargon even in our claims process. And I'll give you guys an annuity example. In annuities, how do you know what is a deferral? What's a 5-year deferral benefit versus a 10-year deferral? What's a spousal continuation? Those are words that get thrown around in the claim space. How do you educate the customer and bring it down? And I think that's where there's an opportunity. If you've got a platform that allows that connectivity, gets that education to the person that wants to engage with that, that's where we're seeing it put together. It's a blend of what we called it yesterday, human automation. You're going to inject a human where you need to, but let the automation do its thing where it needs to.
Yep. And really, again, I'm going to go back to yourself, Bobbie. Thinking about these quick, rapid developments such as ChatGPT and artificial intelligence. How do we become more proactive as opposed to reactive in implementing these things?
So I'm a big believer in whether you are an Insurtech, whether you are an insurer, whether you are a service provider, I'm a big believer in doing innovation spikes in your organization. So have a segment of your team that's focused more on the latest and greatest and look at true use cases. But let's not stop there at the innovation spike. Let's take some of those learnings and start to incorporate them in the mothership, right? So if you've got a separate innovation team, it's a struggle sometimes when you're a large organization. Like we're a 90 people organization. For us, we can have our sprints are 1 month sprints, so we do releases every month. So I can have a team doing innovation, enhancements, and our bug fixes, all going at the same time, and I could incorporate that learning. But if you think about it, it's not a technology issue, it's a process. So if you can create that process of how do you take a learning and apply it into your practice, that's where, it will fuel that innovation. You should be right now. ChatGPT, now there's so much buzz around ChatGPT. We were looking at ChatGPT last year, sometime mid last year when it started to take traction to say, what are the insurance use cases that we can solve with ChatGPT? What are areas that we can just explore and innovate? So when folks are talking to us about those technologies, we're educated, we're smart, and we have those use cases ready. And coupling back with what Demetrius and Amy brought up around partnerships, this is where exactly leverage partners to allow you to give you that learnings.
Yeah, fantastic. And Laurel, coming to yourself, from your perspective, how do we implement these things at speed? Speed is of the essence here.
So I think it's changing the expectations and the mindsets, because a lot of times when we go as a TPA into a carrier and sit down and talk about how we're going to transform or implement them, there's a lot of, this is how we've always done it. And we're like, how can we change that? How can we make you more efficient? How can we bring this technology in to not only help you as a carrier, but help your customer base, help your employees, and help us as your TPA? And I mean, I think a common theme between all of us is partnership and working together. And I think we've all got to get on the boat together and work through it to make it happen, and to make it happen with speed, but to make sure we put that level of security in as well.
And Amy, expanding on that kind of from the TPA's perspective, how do you manage, reacting to different carriers and how they want to do things differently?
So I actually work in our carrier practice. We have a separate boutique group inside Gallagher Bassett that's dedicated to carrier outsourcing specifically. And we have over 100 carrier partners. And we like to call them snowflakes because they're all different. They all have different requirements. They all have different cultures. They all want things done differently. And they're all implementing different technologies at different speeds. So what we do is we sit down and we align with them. And so back to what Demetrius said, and we find out exactly what's important to them, what their goals are. And then we take that and we make sure that our teams that are representing them are truly an extension of those organizations and are aligned in doing the things that they want to do.
Fantastic. And to Demetrius, an interesting one for you here. So I personally, I hear a lot of people talk about moving back to, we call it IRL, right? It's in real life. We're all here now today, 6,000 people at the Javits Center. How do we manage that balance again, between these automation tools cropping up, but also, having that human perspective?
So I think when you think about automation, machine learning, natural language processing, all those elements, the buzzwords, the key for that is really efficiency. That's what we're looking to give people. We're looking to give people efficiency and give them the time to spend what we need them to do, which is with the customer. So as you think about, we talked about first notice of loss and processes that can make that more efficient. I think we should lean heavily into these ideas and really figure out how do we take that, and now we're giving the people that are doing the work, meeting with the customer, spending the time and understanding the true needs of the customer, more time to do that. They have more think time, they have more critical thinking time, and with that, I think you will be able to start seeing that the human touch is always going to be needed, but we can help give it to where it's more dedicated and it's more accurate throughout the process versus the beginning of a claim. You're sitting there and you're doing all these activities that may not be adding as much value as we think from a leadership perspective. Yes, we check the box for regulation. Yes, we check the box for audit. But from a customer standpoint, they're sitting for an extra 45 minutes, an extra 2 hours because I have to check all these boxes. So I think it's leaning in to these technologies, but also understanding how, once we have the technology in place, our people can then move forward and focus on that customer.
And of course, all these things build trust with the customer, right? And I'm going to send this back to yourself, Demetrius. So how do we ensure that we continue to build that trust, but again, still thinking about the likes of fraud and issues like leakage throughout the claims process? How do we ensure that we are still gathering the right data without making the customer feel like we're it's a cumbersome process?
Yeah. And I think you think about when we get all that data, we have to look at it. We let the machine figure out exactly where we should pinpoint, but then we have the human go in there and make sure. So speaking of fraud, you'll see the red flag. In today's world, we have to get a lot of information to figure out those red flags. Machines can figure out anomalies really quick. And they can figure out those anomalies and see, hey, this is different based on what we've experienced based on this data set. Now what you do is you have your SIU investigator or someone in your SIU team. Let's double click into that anomaly and see if it's truly there. And I think that transparency for us with the small business owner to see this is how our process works, letting them into that process a little bit, will start to continue to build that trust, because the ultimate goal here isn't to say, hey, this is a bad actor. It's to stop the fraud before it happens. And utilizing this technology and making sure that we have humans that can pinpoint that can do exactly that.
Yeah. And Laurel, what kind of technologies have you seen that can help with that process?
So quite a few. We're using robotics on a lot of things. We're using some search engines to validate addresses and be proactive up front. In the claims space, a lot of times if a beneficiary is predeceased or something's happened, a lot of people don't think about that when they do their policy. You know, most people will name their spouse or their next of kin, but then what if that person predeceases? When you're looking at a time of death, you know, the last thing you want is to think about, well, if John's not there, who's going to be next? And so we've started looking at ways to be proactive during the life cycle of the policy, to reach out and just say, hey, we're validating, this is your beneficiary, this is your address. Be proactive in that way, using some technologies like GAIAC and all to validate addresses and validate bank account information, you know, because if we can efficiently add and not have to ask them to provide us 200 pieces of information at the claims space, we're trying to beat that up front and make the process simple and smooth and easy for them. And I mean, in the customer experience, you know, somebody in the think tank brought up yesterday, and it's one of those complaints that we hear all the time about, you have no problem getting my premium in your door, but you can't get my claim paid. What's the problem? So look at it from that lens and think about it from that aspect. If we have all the information to get their payments, why do we need to make them jump through so many hoops to process their claim?
And Amy, a question for you. So thinking about how all these, you know, the TPAs, the different kind of parties within these claims processes, how do they all kind of gel together to ensure that these things all work together effectively?
Well, that question just goes back to the partnership again. I mean, it's sitting down with all of your partners and having a thoughtful conversation about what you want the customer experience to be. And when it comes to fraud, it's aligning what your red flags are. Like what, you know, do we have the same definition? And do we have the same process? When do you want us to reach out? When do you not want us to get an investigator? And making sure that everyone's on the same page with that. Same thing with all the other technologies. With Gallagher Bassett, we have something called Waypoint, which is our predictive suite of analytics, and we have it for fraud. So it's, you know, figuring out if what we're doing aligns with what you want to do as a carrier, and making sure that we're, you know, working together to make sure that the customer experience comes out the same.
Fantastic. And Bobbie, a question for yourself. So again, thinking about the now, the immediacy, but also, you know, let's think a little bit about the future, right? In 10 years' time, you know, how do we stack these technologies on top of each other and make sure that they continue to work effectively?
The approach that we share in the industry is best of breed. So the key is having that right foundation to start with. And this is why I'm a big proponent of collaborators and building that ecosystem, because as a company, we're a claims organization. We may not be interested in building a fraud detection engine. My focus for my team is claim. We love claims. That's our sweet spot. But if I can integrate and make it easier for my customers, my insurers, the TPA partners, and have best of breed fraud detection tools, integrating with companies that Laurel talked about. It's all of the things that we know that's happening in the claims life cycle, but how does your staff as well as your customer not feel the pain that I'm jumping from one application to another? It's this seamless experience. It could be integrated with multiple partners, because not one partner can solve all your claims problems. I mean or your operations problems. If they sell that to you, that's not a good partner. But a partner will bring best of breed technologies and present it to you in a seamless way, so that your customer doesn't have to go through hoops, as well as your employees don't have to go through those hoops. So it's about best of breed and connecting, being that connective tissue across the ecosystem.
Fantastic. Well, we've got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to quickly open up for Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, please put your hand up, and we'll bring the mic over to you to ask the question. So feel free, ask away.
Is it working? Yep. Is it working? Okay. Thank you very much for a very intriguing discussion. Anyone could comment about predictive analytics on claims? It was very common on underwriting until recently, but now we are also talking in claims.
I'll start. I think the predictive analytics on claims, there are a lot of avenues to look at, and so I'll start with just a workers' compensation claim. I think there are elements that we learn from looking at the data to where we would be able to see this claim takes this avenue, and what that helps us do, and I tie this back to the people. So you think about when I was talking about AI and all the things that get taken off, now you have that predictive analytics that shows this claim could take this path. That's where that adjuster now, in my opinion, that's their flag where they say, I need to go do this, and it rises to the top of their task list. So that's where I see that intersection with predictive analytics and really being able to guide that adjuster faster than what we've been able to do before just by going through the regular process.
Yeah, and at Gallagher Bassett, we do the same thing. It's a tool to help our adjusters, which we call them resolution managers, but we have, I think I mentioned, we call it Waypoint. We have it for claim assignment. We have it for litigation propensity. We have it for fraud detection. We have it for setting reserves. I mean, we use predictive analytics throughout the entire claim life cycle. So it's sitting there as a tool for the adjuster that says, hey, based on all the factors of this, we thought the reserve should be about here, but you made it different, so tell us why you're making it different. And we have supervisors check that. So it's a tool to help guide. It's not going to make any decisions for the adjuster, but it's going to help give them the tools that they need to make sure they're on track.
I would agree with that too. We use it in the same fashion, and it all boils down to the data and using your data mart and your data pools to help you, to help your employees, to help your customers, to help their customers. So using the predictive analytic model and looking at, just last year's claim cycle and what we saw and how to help the adjusters move forward and make their processes easier.
And there's a couple of use cases we're looking at in the life annuity health side of the house, especially on the life side, is leveraging these models. I call it the circle of life. So from a claim, how do you funnel, and at what point do you engage the agent if the agent's not engaged? Because there is a opportunity to serve that beneficiary. So those are models that we're looking at integrating to help carriers with more retention of assets.
Awesome. A question here.
Time for one more question. My question is actually for Laurel. When you engage with your customers and you talk about the mix between technology and people and the fact that humans can be empathetic and, as far as we know, machines can't, how do they receive that message?
It's a mix. Some are way more ready to go into technology and make it more efficient, and then the others are kind of stuck in, this is how we've always done it. But for us, when we sit down with our partners and our carriers, we ask them what they want, and in the TPA space, we're moving more towards a new business aspect, but we have a lot of legacy old business that's on the books, and so there's a lot of generalized tendencies to think that the older population doesn't want to use tech. They want that paper mail and that wet signature, and the millennials and the younger population, what I like to say my children, they want to do everything electronic. And when we've done our think tanks and our focus groups, that's just generalization and people putting their assumptions there. And so working with them, because I've sat down just recently with a carrier and they're like, we have an older block of legacy clients and they're not going to go tech. And they actually want the tech. They don't want the paper and they don't want the headache. They say, the snail mail's long. So I think it's dependent on the carrier and the company and how progressive they want to be, but I think we're all shifting towards that model.
If I may add to that point that Laurel's just talked about, what we're finding is from a partnership perspective, if you're working with many insurers, there's a trend, right? So great conversation that Laurel and I had last year was really influencing a carrier to make a decision as simple as death certificates. At what point are you going to accept a certified death certificate versus a proof of death? And that tolerance, that risk tolerance across the industry varies. But because you have industry perspective across the different partners, and this is where partners come in, we were able to recommend, hey, most of your folks are doing 100K and even 250K for certified debt certificates. You may not need to do the 25K level that we were trying to influence them out of, because you're just going to have a higher touch, human touch, versus automation.